Do you remember that earlier we talked about the trunk of the tree, which represented facial expression and body movement? Well, now, what are we going to focus on? On the branches of the tree. And that were those branches? The branches were related to the grammar of the language, right? And also to the space in which we make our signs. This is super important. In my personal experience, I've spent many years talking with deaf people. However, I've often heard from those who are just beginning to learn things like, I already know several signs. I have vocabulary. I know how to say mom, dad, grandmother, and many other words. But when I try to talk, it comes out choppy. It doesn't sound natural. I don't handle the grammar well. Does that happen to you? Do you feel like you don't know how to order the words or the sentences? Well, the same thing happened to me. It's a common problem. I remember more or less when I was about 14 years old, and I already had quite a wide vocabulary in sign language. In fact, I knew many words, the family, vocabulary among others, and I had already mastered it. But even so, I still had serious difficulties with grammar. So I approached a friend who had much more experience than me, and I asked him directly, how should I order the sentences? He explained it to me. Look, the order of sentences is not rigid or inflexible, but I'll give you a little guide to help you improve. The way I organize and structure ideas is based on three main elements: the object, the subject, and the verb. Here in Albania, the initials will be OSF because the word for verbs is writing differently. But whether in the United States or Albania, grammar is in some way universal, so to make it simpler, let's stick with OSB. So, I start applying that pattern with deaf people, communicating with them using that idea. Every time I had to speak, I would mentally repeat the OSB order. Again and again, I keep it in mind. I did it that way for months, even a full year, and deaf people understood me when I signed it to them. But when I watched them more closely, I noticed that when they talked to each other, they didn't always use the same structure I was using. Why was that? To find out, I asked some deaf people directly how they arranged their sentences, and most told me they didn't even think about how they organized them. It was completely natural to them, since they had grown up using sign language from birth. So, I read some grammar books by American authors, and there I found three structures mentioned as the most common. One was OSB, another subject, verb, object, and the third subject, object, verb. From then on, I began to observe more closely, and I noticed that some deaf people use one order, others use a different one, and some spoke in a way very similar to mine. It was then that I understood there were different structures depending on each deaf person that everyone followed. Each had their own way of organizing sentences. And of course, it wasn't possible of the man of a group of deaf people. You must speak using this structure, or you have to use that other one. No, that wasn't possible, and it still isn't. Each one was different. However, by carefully observing the patterns, I realized that there was indeed something in common, a shared element, a point that all deaf people respected, and that stood out above grammatical order. So I understood that the three structures mentioned were on a lower level, and above them something stands out: the grammar of space or visual spatial grammar. But what does this really mean? Well, now we're going to explain it.